Very few draft prospects have been as hyped as Harley Reid, a contested beast whose starring features are his physical strength, explosive power, versatility, scoreboard impact, and his X factor. Before even being drafted into the AFL, Harley Reid has been one of the most talked about players of the year, whose journey at just 18 years old has been filled with controversy created by the media. Today we will be exploring Harley Reid's rise to becoming the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft. Harley Reid was born on the 6th of April 2005 in Tongala, a Victorian town with a population of 1,926 people as of 2016. At just 3 years old, Harley's football journey had begun and was heavily impacted by his father, Mark Reid, a non-professional AFL player who had a long career playing 401 games for the Blues before retiring in 2013. Every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, Harley would travel 3 hours out of Melbourne to a town called Tongala to watch and support his dad play. Growing up, Harley played multiple sports such as basketball and cricket, however footy was Harley's true passion. From a young age, Harley was and still is a massive Geelong Cats supporter, specifically idolising Patrick Dangerfield. At the age of 10, Harley played his first under-12s game, winning a best on ground for his performance, and moved to the under-14s for his next game, due to a shortage of players. Despite playing against players 4 years older than Harley, just like his previous game, he dominated, scoring 6 goals, and was once again the best on ground. Unsurprisingly, Harley made the Victorian under-12 side, and got his jumper presented to him by Christian Petrarca. During his under-14s campaign, Harley had scored 130 goals in a season, while in the under-15s, he once again made the under-15s Victorian side. In his draft year, Harley spent his pre-season at the Bombers, and even played in one of the intra-clubs. Throughout the year, Harley's played for multiple teams, including the Bombers reserves, Carlton's VFL side, the Bendigo Pioneers, and Vic Country in the National Under-18 Championships. Harley Reid ended his 2023 campaign with 190 games, 352 goals, and 87 best on grounds. He was an Under-18 All-Australian in 2021 and 2022, and won the Vic Country MVP, while also finishing 3rd in the Lark Medal, which is awarded to the best player in the National Championship. The eventual winner was Riley Sanders. Despite not being drafted into the AFL, Harley Reid had become one of the most talked about players in the AFL media. Despite all of these positives, the AFL's most effective and prolific shock jock journo was ready to make some commotion. It was of course none other than Kane Cornelius Cornes. When talking about Kane Cornes, I believe it is always important to highlight that Kane Cornes has simply perfected his role as a shock jock journo. He has simply mastered how to generate clicks and views from controversial statements. Contrastingly to his co-hosts, Kane also seems to have a firm grip on modern day social media. 1 month before the Harley Reid media implosion, Kane Cornes released an article titled "Why the AFL's Next Big Thing Needs to Avoid Football's Graveyard." The article details why Harley Reid must avoid the wooden spoon team, the West Coast Eagles.
I prefer really not to speak.
While it's fine to highlight that the West Coast Eagles season had been dreadful up to that point, Kane Cornes is directly challenging the integrity and the concept of the AFL national draft, hinting at the idea that Harley Reid must utilise his influence as a top-end pick to dictate which team he plays for. The concept of manipulating the draft is also known as draft tampering. While at the time this article just appeared to be the stock standard Kane Cornes controversial rage-baiting article, little did we know it was just the tip of the iceberg. The longer the 2023 season progressed, the more apparent it became that the West Coast Eagles would possess the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft. However, one singular clip would send the entire AFL community into anarchy. One infamous clip that threatened to challenge the AFL draft forever. One clip to rule them all. AFL sport journalist Sam McClure had announced on his own podcast, the Tradies podcast, that Harley Reid was unwilling to move interstate to West Coast.
I just don't think West Coast will pick him.
Well, that's so you do the deal for one then, and you.
But I wouldn't do the deal if I'm North.
So you think you play the buff?
You got 2 and 3, right?
Yeah.
Just say, pick him. Go on. Don't you want to pick one? Nah, you're not going to pick him. We don't need it. We're going to get him at 2. Pick him.
I haven't really heard that approach. I don't.
They're not going to pick him, Mitch. They're not going to pick him. He doesn't want to go there.
But everything I said before about North Melbourne having to give up, they don't have to give up much for pick one. You don't reckon? That's the fact that West Coast.
They don't need pick one. They're going to get him at 2.
Of course, serial stirrer Kane Cornelius Cornes backed the idea that players who are projected as top prospects should be able to dictate which AFL club they are drafted to. It of course only takes a few seconds of critical thinking to highlight how detrimental setting a precedent like this would be for a national draft that's entire purpose is to be an equalisation method for all teams so every team can rebuild, develop their players and have a chance at success. In my opinion, team equalisation is a far better method than other sports like soccer, where the rich teams buy all the best players from other clubs and always stay successful. What followed Sam McClure's statement can only be described as pandemonium. Every AFL personality chimed in on the groundbreaking news. Amongst the anarchy, Harley Reid's coach Danny O'Brien stated that Harley is happy to go anywhere, while former Premiership Eagle and now AFL personality Will Schofield sent
a message for Harley Reid.
West Coast footy boss Gavin Bell addressed and denied all claims by Sam McClure, stating that we've had no communication from any player of a lack of willingness to come to our football club. Just as quickly as the rumour had spread, it had vanished into thin air after Sam McClure had announced on Footy Classified that
if he gets called out by West Coast at pick one, he will happily go there. Because from all, I've never met him, from the sounds of things, he's an extremely professional young man. But
despite Sam McClure retracting his statement, whispers of Harley Reid not wanting to travel interstate to West Coast would not dissipate. However, a brilliant statement from Harley Reid on the Distractables podcast.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
After the whole saga emphasised his commitment to West Coast if they drafted him.
You would come to the West Coast Eagles gleefully, happily, and pull on a West Coast Eagles jumper.
Yeah, for sure, with number 9.
While this statement may not mean much to AFL fans outside West Coast, the number 9 is a very significant jersey, as it's a jersey that Ben Cousins and Nick Nat both wore during their careers. During a telethon stream days later, Ben Cousins gave his seal of approval for Harley to wear the number 9.
It's number 9, doesn't he?
Give him number 9.
Well, he does, he's already said that. Ben's number, Nick Nat's number 2, so...
Have you approved that? Oh, mate, he can have the number 9.
However, something brilliant but unprecedented was occurring. The only two teams who could get the first pick in the draft and obtain Harley Reid were suddenly winning games of football. After 20 rounds of football and a 24-round season, West Coast and North Melbourne had both been woeful, only winning a total of 3 games combined, and neither team had won a game since round 2, where West Coast defeated the Giants and North controversially defeated the Fremantle Dockers. By round 20, these two titans were facing each other. After a powerful display from West Coast and a brilliant comeback surge from North Melbourne, West Coast came out on top, winning by 5 points at home. This game was pivotal to both clubs, as West Coast and North Melbourne now sat in the same amount of wins. For the first time in months, the number 1 pick was no longer guaranteed to West Coast. Suddenly, the last 4 games of the season would be vital for both clubs. After facing each other, North Melbourne and West Coast had changed. Suddenly, both teams had become more competitive than they had all year. Round 21. West Coast nearly earned back-to-back wins after a late surge before losing their lead in the game in the last minute of the match. In round 22, North also narrowly lost to Essendon after a spirited effort and a 5-goal hold to Nick Larkey. The final 2 rounds, round 23 and 24, single-handedly changed the AFL landscape. Round 23, a game where the Bulldogs had everything to lose. A loss would mean their chances of playing finals would be determined by fate, but a win would secure them a spot in the finals campaign. With around 2 minutes remaining in the first quarter, West Coast had scored 5 goals to 1. After leading the first and second quarter, the Bulldogs, powered by the Bont and Adam Treloar, took control of the third quarter. However, one criminally underrated small forward veteran and one of my personal favourite players wasn't going to let this win slip away from the Eagles. A 3-goal final quarter with 5 goals total for the game, Jamie Cripps had won the game for West Coast, a game that moved West Coast out of last place, and a game that derailed the Bulldogs' chances of a finals campaign. After West Coast's stirring victory, round 24 had arrived. One final game for each club that decided who would pick up Harley Reid. North Melbourne went into the final round holding pick 1 and the chance of finishing last on the ladder 3 years in a row, the Spoon three-peat. North versus the Gold Coast Suns.
Kanga, kanga, kanga!
Ray, ray, ray! The mighty sun!
A match that meant nothing in affecting the final series, but a match that meant everything to their fans. After being down in the first 2 quarters of the match, North Melbourne were not backing down. A masterclass comeback spirited by Nick Larkey scoring 9 goals in a dominant display was enough for North Melbourne to get their 3 wins and avoid the wooden spoon after West Coast later that day lost at home to the Adelaide Crows and therefore received the number 1 pick. Going into the trade period holding the prestigious pick 1 and realistically Harley Reid, there was lots of conjecture from the media whether West Coast would trade pick 1 so they can bring in more young talent to help their rebuild. After all, it had been proven that West Coast are willing to make bold moves and split high draft picks. Last year, finishing second last, West Coast traded pick 2 for what became picks 9, 14 and 2 future firsts. Because of the growing talk that talents at the top end of the draft did not want to move interstate. Pick 9 became Ruben Jimby and pick 14 became Elijah Hewitt, who are both very good looking prospects, have already proven their ability at the AFL level. Just like in the 2022 draft where West Coast drafted Ruben Jimby and Elijah Hewitt, who were both born and lived in Perth, there was lots of talk around West Coast wanting to draft a Western Australian defender who in my opinion looks like a very good prospect. All of these opinions and debates from media personalities created what would be a very eventful trade period. After some silence, West Coast had officially offered pick 1 to North Melbourne for picks 2 and 3, which in my opinion, and also everyone else's online, that this was a bad trade for North Melbourne if they accepted it, which they did not. North Melbourne offered an equally bad deal for pick 1, offering 4 late first round picks, which was also rejected. After some time, North Melbourne and the Melbourne Demons both made offers to West Coast for pick 1. North Melbourne offered pick 2 and 2 of the later picks that could be 15, 17 or 18 for pick 1 and 23, while Melbourne offered picks 6, 11, 42 and a future first for pick 1. West Coast also rejected these offers. After making no deals during the trade period, the only time pick 1 could be traded would be moments before Harley Reid is selected, which would obviously make clubs offer over-the-top deals for Harley Reid, depending on how much other teams wanted him and also the hype that was built up for him. This Harley Reid dilemma also helped build hype for the first round of the draft, after only using 1 minute and 26 seconds of their 5-minute timer.
With pick 1, the West Coast Eagles select Harley Reid.
Being pick number 1, Harley Reid was presented the inaugural Alan Aylett medal and was presented the famous number 9 jumper by Nick Nat. After a turbulent journey into the AFL, Harley Reid has arrived in Perth and is currently living with newly appointed co-captain of the club, Oscar Allen, and is hopefully enjoying being at the club and living in Western Australia. I've also heard that Harley Reid has an established relationship with other draftee Clay Hall, while my new favourite player Noah Long was his teammate at the Bendigo Pioneers last year. West Coast have also tactically brought over Harley Reid's good mate and former GWS player Jason Gilby, also known as the Milkman, to play in the Eagles waffle team. Hopefully now, with West Coast having an extremely young list, with 22 of their 44 players being under 21, Harley Reid can feel more welcome and build up strong relationships. Assuming Harley Reid is playing in the AFL team, which barring injuries he will be, it is going to be a baptism of fire, as West Coast play Port, the Giants, the Western Bulldogs and the Swans in their first 4 games, only playing the Giants at home. As a West Coast fan myself, I cannot be more excited to see what Harley Reid can bring to the field. I also don't want to pressure him into being our one and true saviour, even though he will be. Hopefully barring any injuries and he doesn't get the West Coast curse, we should be fine.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening and good night.